The morning my husband called me from the kitchen to tell me that my pension was gone, I was still in my housecoat, standing at the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth. I remember that clearly. I remember the sound of the bristles against my teeth and the way the morning light came through the frosted window and landed on the little blue ceramic soap dish my mother gave me when I got married 31 years ago. I remember those things because when the world cracks beneath you, your mind reaches for the smallest, steadiest things it can find. He called out to me so casually, like he was telling me the eggs were done, like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. By the time I set my toothbrush down and walked into that kitchen, I was already a different woman than the one who had picked it up. I just did not know it yet. My name is Everly. I am 63 years old. I worked for 31 years as a hospital administrator in a mid-sized city in the American South. I raised 2 sons. I kept a home. I loved a man. And that man, the one I trusted with every account number, every document, every piece of paper that bore my name, sold my pension. The pension I had built over 3 decades. The one that was supposed to carry me into a quiet, dignified old age. He sold it, and then he sat down to eat his scrambled eggs. Let me take you back to where this all started, because this story did not begin that morning in the kitchen. It began much, much earlier. And there were signs. Looking back, there were always signs. I simply chose to love him past them.
You have to understand who Everly was before all of this. Not the woman standing stunned in her housecoat. The woman before. I grew up in a small Georgia town, the second of 4 girls. My mother cleaned houses, and my father drove a delivery truck. We were not poor in spirit, but we were careful with money, in the way that people who have survived true scarcity always are. I learned early that the only security you could count on was the kind you built yourself, slowly, brick by brick, year by year. When I married Leonard, I was 32. I had already been working at Mercy General for 5 years. I had my own savings account. I had my own car, paid off. I had a Roth IRA I had started at 28 because a woman at my church told me I would thank myself later. I was not naive about money. I was not someone who handed over her financial life without thinking. But love has a way of softening those edges, and Leonard was charming in the way that certain men are, steady on the surface, attentive in the beginning, the kind of man who remembers how you take your coffee and uses that as proof that he loves you deeply. We built a life together that looked from the outside like everything a woman could want. A brick house on Camellia Street, a yard with a fig tree out back, 2 sons, Marcus and Darian, who grew up into good men, mostly. Sunday dinners that lasted until the fireflies came out. Neighbors who waved. A church pew we had sat in for 22 years. Leonard worked in commercial insurance. He did well enough. But over time, I had come to be the one with the steadier income, the better benefits, the pension that was growing year after year, like something quiet and reliable and trustworthy. And I was proud of that. I was proud of what I had built. We had a joint account for household expenses. We had separate accounts for our own professional matters. That was the arrangement we had agreed on early in the marriage, and it had worked just fine for years. Or so I believed. Looking back, I should have noticed when Leonard started asking questions about my pension, not in a curious way, but in a probing way. How much is it worth now? Have they changed the payout structure? Can you cash it out early if you wanted to? I thought he was just being financially curious. He had always liked to talk about money. I thought it was one of his better qualities.
Looking back, I should have noticed when he started making phone calls in the garage, when he started closing the laptop when I walked into the room, when he stopped mentioning his weekend trips to Atlanta as just golf, and started being vague about where he had been and who he had seen. But I was busy. I was working. I was tired in the particular way that women of a certain age and a certain position get tired, not just in the body, but in the part of the mind that is always watching, always managing, always holding the whole household in place while also holding yourself. So I did not look too closely, and Leonard knew that. I believe now that he counted on it.
It was a Thursday morning in early November. I remember the date because it was 3 days after my younger son Darian's birthday. We had had a small family dinner on Monday, and Leonard had been in good spirits all week, laughing easily, refilling everyone's wine glass, making jokes. I had thought he seemed like his old self. I had been grateful for it. That Thursday, I woke at 6:15 as I always do. Leonard was already up, which was unusual. He is not a morning person, and his retirement, he had retired 14 months earlier at 61, had made him even less so. He typically did not surface until 8 or 9, shuffling to the kitchen in his slippers while I was already out the door. But that morning, he was in the kitchen before me, dressed, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, watching the door like he was waiting for me to come through it. I remember thinking he looked nervous. I filed that observation away somewhere in the back of my mind and went to the cabinet for my mug. "Everly," he said, "come sit down." I looked at him over my shoulder. Something in his voice made the air in the kitchen feel different, thicker. "Let me get my coffee first," I said. "Please," he said, "come sit down first." I turned and looked at him then, really looked at him, and I saw something on his face that I had never seen there in 31 years of marriage. It was a combination of things, guilt, relief, and beneath both of those, something harder to name, something that looked almost like defiance. I sat down across from him, my coffee mug still empty in my hands. He said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm. I have come to believe that when someone tells you to stay calm before they have said anything, they already know what they are about to say does not deserve your calm. They are asking you to swallow your reaction in advance, to manage yourself for their comfort." I did not say any of that. I waited. He said, "I cashed out your pension." I heard the words. I understood each one individually. But together they formed a sentence that made no sense to me, so I sat there for a moment, turning them over. "What do you mean?" I said. "I cashed out the pension," he said again. "Your pension from the hospital. I liquidated it about 8 weeks ago. The paperwork came through, and the money was transferred." I felt my hands go cold around the ceramic mug. My chest tightened in a way that was not white pain but was close to it. "Leonard," I said, very carefully, "you do not have access to my pension. That account is in my name alone." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had power of attorney." The room went very still. "No, you do not," I said. "Everly." He looked at the table. 7 years ago, when your mother got sick and you were going back and forth to Savannah every other weekend, you gave me a general power of attorney so you could handle her estate from a distance and I could manage things here if needed. You remember, we both signed in front of the notary at the bank. I did remember. I remembered it perfectly. I had granted him that power of attorney for a specific, temporary, family purpose. I had never rescinded it because I had never thought I needed to. I had trusted him. "That was for an emergency," I said. My voice was very quiet. "That was for a family emergency, not for this." "The document did not specify limits," he said. "It was a general power of attorney.
I checked with an attorney before I did anything. The deliberateness of that sentence hit me like a wall of cold water. He had consulted an attorney. He had planned this. He had not acted on impulse or confusion. He had researched it. He had prepared. He had gone to someone and asked, "Can I legally do this to my wife?" And someone had apparently told him that technically, yes, he could. "Where is the money?" I said. He looked up at me then, and this is the part that I still find most difficult to speak about, even now, because of what came next in his eyes. There was a flicker, a brief, naked moment of something that looked almost like shame, but it passed quickly, and what replaced it was that harder thing, that defiant thing. "It is invested," he said, "in a business venture, a partnership I entered into with some fellows from Atlanta. There is a real opportunity here, Everly. We are talking about returns that—" "Stop," I said. He stopped. I set my empty mug down on the table. I placed both of my hands flat on the surface. I breathed in once, slowly, through my nose. "You took my pension," I said. "The pension I built over 31 years of working. The pension that was supposed to be my income when I retire. You took it without telling me, without asking me, without a single conversation, and you put it into a business with men I have never met." "I was going to tell you," he said. "Once the investment started producing returns, I was going to surprise you. We would have been set, Everly, really set, both of us." I looked at him for a long time. I thought about 31 years. I thought about the fig tree in the backyard. I thought about the little blue soap dish in the bathroom. I thought about my mother, who taught me that the only security you could count on was the kind you built yourself. "How much?" I said. He told me the number. $214,000. Gone. I stood up. I picked up my mug. I walked to the coffee maker, and I filled it. My hands were shaking slightly, but I did not spill a drop. Then I walked to the bedroom, and I closed the door. I sat on the edge of our bed, in the morning quiet, and I said to myself very clearly, as if I needed to hear it out loud to believe it, this was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was a plan. I gave myself exactly 20 minutes to feel the full weight of what had happened. And then I picked up my phone. The first person I called was not a lawyer. It was my older son, Marcus. Marcus is 40 years old. He works in logistics. He has a level head, and he has always had what I can only describe as an instinct for the truth of a situation, for seeing past what people say to what they actually mean. He got that from my side of the family. He answered on the second ring. "Mama, you okay?" "I need you to come to the house," I said. "Not today. I need you to come this weekend. I need you not to tell your father I called, and I need you to bring your thinking brain, not your emotions." There was a pause. "What happened?" "I will tell you everything when you get here. Right now, I am still processing. I just needed to hear your voice and tell you I am all right." "Are you all right?" "I will be," I said. "I will be." I spent the rest of that Thursday in a kind of careful, controlled numbness. Leonard moved around the house as if everything was normal, or as if he was hoping we might simply skip past what had happened. He made sandwiches for lunch and left one on the counter for me. He asked if I wanted him to run by the grocery store. He behaved in every outward way, like a man who had done something he considered resolved. That evening, he came to sit beside me on the couch, and he said, "Everly, I want you to know that I did this for us. I have spent 14 months watching you carry this house financially while my savings dwindle, and I could not stand it. I needed to do something. I needed to feel like I was contributing. I looked at him and I said, "Leonard, if you wanted to contribute, you could have talked to me. We could have made a plan together. You did not talk to me. You went behind my back and you took from me. That is not contribution. That is theft." He flinched at the word. "That is a very harsh way to look at it." "That is an accurate way to look at it," I said. He went to bed early that night. I sat in the kitchen with my phone, my reading glasses, and a yellow legal pad, and I began to write down everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. Over the following days, Leonard made several attempts to normalize what had happened. He came to me with printed pages showing the projected returns on the investment. He showed me the name of the company, some vague holding entity called Meridian Capital Partners, LLC, and the names of two men, both from Atlanta, one of whom Leonard had apparently known from his insurance days. He spoke about the investment with an enthusiasm that I found alarming, because it had the quality of a man convincing himself rather than explaining to someone else. I listened. I asked measured questions. I took notes on my legal pad, and I did not tell him what I was thinking, which was this: that I had never heard of a legitimate investment opportunity that required $214,000 of someone else's money to be deployed in secret. On Friday evening, I called my friend Geneva, who has been my closest friend since we were both young nurses. She was a nurse, I was in administration. We met in a hospital cafeteria over terrible coffee 28 years ago and have been inseparable since. I told Geneva everything. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Everly, has he given you any documentation? Any contract? Anything with his name and yours both on it?" "He has shown me papers," I said, "but everything I have seen has only his name. And the power of attorney document, the original one from when your mama was sick. Do you have a copy of that?" I thought about it. "It should be in the filing cabinet, in the study." "You need to find it," Geneva said. "Tonight if you can. And Everly, honey, you need to talk to an attorney. Not a friend, not your son, an attorney. A real one, who handles family law and asset disputes. You need to know exactly where you stand." I knew she was right. I had known it since that morning in the kitchen. I had just needed someone I trusted to say it out loud. That night, after Leonard fell asleep, I went to the study. I opened the filing cabinet. And that is where things began to get more complicated and more disturbing than I had already imagined. But I did not know yet that what I would find in that filing cabinet was only the beginning. What I did not know was that things were about to get even worse.
The filing cabinet in our study has 4 drawers. The top 2 were mine, my professional documents, tax records, insurance policies, medical records. The bottom 2 were Leonard's. We had kept it that way for years, our papers side by side in the same cabinet, an arrangement that had once felt like an easy domesticity and now felt like something more significant. I found the original power of attorney document in my second drawer, in a folder labeled Legal General. I sat down at the desk and read it under the lamp. Geneva had been right to have me look at it, because as I read it, I realized something that Leonard had told me that morning was partially true and partially not. The document was technically a general power of attorney. My attorney at the time, a sweet older man named Mr. Beaumont, who has since retired, had drawn it up quickly because we were in the middle of my mother's medical crisis, and I needed to be able to act on things from a distance. But the document also contained a clause, a standard clause that Mr. Beaumont always included, that specified the power of attorney was intended for the purpose of managing the grantor's affairs during periods of incapacity or extended absence, and was subject to the grantor's ongoing intent and direction. I read that clause 3 times. Then I set the document down and I sat very still. Ongoing intent and direction. I had never directed Leonard to access my pension. I had never intended him to have access to my pension. He had used a document meant for emergency management to execute a premeditated financial transaction. That was not what the document was for. That was not what I had intended. I wrote this all down on my legal pad. Then I opened the bottom 2 drawers of the filing cabinet, Leonard's drawers, and I sat for a moment considering. I had never looked through Leonard's papers. In 31 years, I had respected his space in that cabinet as he had respected mine. But respect is a 2-way arrangement, and it had already been broken, not by me. I opened his drawers.
What I found over the next 45 minutes changed everything I thought I understood about the previous 14 months of our marriage. There were papers relating to Meridian Capital Partners LLC going back almost a year, far longer than the 8 weeks Leonard had suggested. There were emails printed out and filed between Leonard and the two Atlanta men, dated as far back as 13 months ago. 13 months ago, Leonard had still been working. 13 months ago, we had been a normal married couple who ate dinner together and watched the news. The emails discussed my pension by name, by account number, by projected value. They referenced the power of attorney as a tool to be used when the time was right. My hands were shaking so badly by this point that I had to put the papers down and press my palms flat against the desk until they steadied. When the time was right. Not if he could access it, when the time was right. This was not an impulse. This was not a desperate decision made in a moment of poor judgment. This had been planned for over a year. This had been a coordinated effort between my husband and two men whose names I had never heard until 2 days ago. I also found something else in that drawer, a statement from a savings account I had never known existed, an account in Leonard's name alone at a bank in Decatur where we had no business. The statement showed a balance of approximately $18,000. The deposit history showed regular transfers over the past 11 months from our joint checking account. Small amounts, 200 here, 300 there, amounts that would not raise a flag on a monthly statement if you were not looking for them. I had not been looking for them. I had trusted him. How could I have been so blind? This was not a mistake. This was not a midlife crisis or a man who had made a bad financial decision out of desperation. This was a plan, a long, patient, deliberate plan that had been running alongside our marriage like a second river, invisible, underground, moving steadily in a direction I had never seen. I sat in that study until 2 a.m, reading everything, copying everything down on my legal pad, photographing documents with my phone. I made 2 phone calls that night. I left voice messages because it was the middle of the night and offices were closed. The first was to a family law attorney whose name Geneva had given me years ago, a woman named Patricia Raines, who had an office downtown and a reputation for being, as Geneva put it, absolutely unafraid of a fight. The second was to the Human Resources Department at Mercy General on their after-hours line, asking them to call me back first thing in the morning regarding my pension account and any recent changes to it. Then I went to bed. I lay down beside my husband in our bed. I listened to him breathe, and I thought very calmly about what I was going to do next. That is when I noticed something that changed everything.
The call from Mercy General's HR department came at 8:13 the following morning. I took it in my car, in the driveway, with the engine running. The woman on the phone was named Diane, and she had a careful voice, the voice of someone who has had to deliver difficult news before and has learned to do it gently. She confirmed that the pension account in my name had been fully liquidated approximately 8 weeks prior. She confirmed that the transaction had been processed through a power of attorney authorization. She also told me something that stopped my breath. The day the transaction had been processed, someone had called the pension office directly to provide an authorization code. The call had come from my home phone number. My home phone number, the landline in our kitchen. Leonard had not just signed papers and mailed them in. He had called my pension office from our kitchen phone and given them an authorization code. He had stood in our kitchen, in the house we shared, and spoken on the phone in what was probably a completely ordinary voice, and he had liquidated my retirement. "Diane," I said, "I need to know, is there any process by which this transaction could be reviewed or disputed?" There was a pause. "Miss Everly, I would strongly encourage you to speak with an attorney before pursuing anything through our office. A transaction processed through a legally valid power of attorney is very difficult to reverse at our level, but an attorney could advise you on whether legal avenues exist to hold the individual responsible." "I understand," I said. "Thank you." I hung up and sat in my car for a moment. The fig tree in the backyard was visible from where I sat, its bare November branches against the gray sky. I had planted that tree the year Marcus was born.
Then I pulled out of the driveway and drove to Patricia Raines' office. Attorney Raines was in her mid-50s, trim, with natural gray locks pinned back and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She had an office full of books and a stillness about her that I liked immediately, the stillness of someone who has heard every variety of human trouble and is not surprised by any of it. I sat across from her and I laid out everything: the power of attorney document, the printed emails I had photographed, the hidden savings account, the timeline, the home phone call, all of it. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk and said, "Miss Everly, what your husband has done is almost certainly actionable. The question of whether it rises to the level of fraud versus abuse of fiduciary duty, which is the misuse of a power of attorney for personal gain at the expense of the grantor, will depend on some details, but the evidence you have brought me is significant." "What can I do?" I said. "Several things," she said. "First, we move quickly. You need to secure every financial asset that is still accessible to you before he does anything else. Joint accounts, individual accounts, everything you still have control over. We do that today. Second, I file a civil complaint alleging fraudulent conversion and breach of fiduciary duty. Third, we pursue recovery of the funds from the investment entity, Meridian Capital Partners, because if that LLC was established in part using your funds without your consent, you may have a claim against the entity itself as well as your husband." She leaned forward slightly. "Miss Everly, I want to be honest with you. Recovering the full amount may not be possible, depending on where the money currently sits and what has been done with it. But your husband is not untouchable, not legally and not financially. He has assets in his name, he has the hidden savings account, he has his insurance licensing, which could be affected by a fraud finding. And if the investment partnership turns out to be any kind of fraudulent scheme, which based on what you have described is not impossible, there could be additional legal consequences." She looked at me steadily. "Are you ready to do this?" she said. "I have been ready," I said, "since 8 in the morning on Thursday. The thing about being a hospital administrator for 31 years is that you learn to execute under pressure. You learn that feelings and actions are separate things, that you can be devastated and still function. You can be heartbroken and still make a decision. That skill, which I had built over decades of managing crises and difficult situations in a professional environment, was now finally being put to its most important use. I spent that Saturday executing a checklist that Patricia Raines and I had drawn up together. I transferred the majority of funds from our joint checking account into an individual account in my name at a different bank, funds that were demonstrably from my salary deposits over the past months, which Patricia confirmed I had every legal right to separate while legal proceedings were underway. I changed the password on my individual accounts. I notified the bank that held our joint mortgage about a potential legal dispute, placing a flag on any requests to refinance or modify the mortgage terms. I also did something that when I tell people about it, they always say was their favorite part of the story. I called the bank and froze Leonard's access to our joint account pending legal review. Not drained it, not stolen from it, froze it, through a proper legal instrument, filed with the court and served to the bank the following Monday, which placed the account in protective status while the civil proceedings were initiated. Leonard did not know any of this was coming. That Sunday, Marcus arrived. I sat with my son at the kitchen table and I told him everything. He listened. His jaw tightened and I could see the effort it took him not to express what he was feeling. When I finished, he said, "Mama, what do you need from me?" "I need you to be calm," I said. "I need you to trust that I have a plan. I need you to not confront your father yet because timing matters. Can you do that?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am." While Leonard was going about his weekend as if nothing had changed, he had no idea that I was already 3 steps ahead of him.
The Monday morning that Leonard discovered the joint account was frozen was the Monday after I had spent the weekend executing every step of my plan. I was not home when he found out. I was at Patricia Raines' office, signing initial legal filings. My phone rang at 10:47 in the morning, and I looked at the screen and saw his name, and I let it go to voicemail. He called 4 more times in the next 20 minutes. I let every call go. When I finally listened to the voicemails, hours later, I could hear the progression clearly. The first message was confused, asking if there was a problem with the account. The second was more urgent. The third was angry. The fourth was something I had never heard from Leonard in 31 years, and that was actual fear. I had his attention now. When I arrived home that evening, he was sitting at the kitchen table. The same table, the same chair, almost the same posture as that Thursday morning when this had all begun. But his face was entirely different. The defiance was gone.
In its place was something raw and unsteady. "What did you do?" he said. I set my keys on the counter, and I poured myself a glass of water, and I sat down across from him, and I said, "Leonard, I would like you to listen to me carefully." "You froze the account," he said. "I tried to pay for groceries this afternoon, and the card was declined. I called the bank, and they said there is a legal hold. Everly, what—" "I want you to listen," I said again, quietly. He stopped. "Last Thursday," I said, "you told me that you had liquidated my pension that I built over 31 years, that you accessed using a power of attorney I granted you for emergency family matters 7 years ago, without my knowledge or consent, in coordination with other parties, over a period of planning that lasted at least 13 months. You then sat down and ate your scrambled eggs." He opened his mouth. "I am not finished," I said. He closed it. "I have retained an attorney. We have filed a civil complaint alleging fraudulent conversion and breach of fiduciary duty. The joint account is in protected status pending those legal proceedings. My individual accounts are secured. The mortgage servicer has been notified, and I have also notified the State Insurance Licensing Board of a potential financial impropriety, which means your license is under review." The color drained from his face in a way that was startling to witness. "I also want you to know," I said, "that I have copies of the emails you printed out and kept in the filing cabinet, the ones that go back 13 months, the ones where you and your partners discuss my account number and the power of attorney by name, the ones where someone writes, 'When the time is right, we move.' I have all of those." He put both of his hands over his face and pressed hard, the way a man does when he is trying to stop himself from unraveling in front of someone. "Everly," he said, into his hands. "Everly, I was going to fix it. When the returns came in—" "Leonard," I said gently, "there are no returns coming in." He lowered his hands and looked at me. "I had my attorney research Meridian Capital Partners, LLC," I said. "It was registered 14 months ago by a man named Derek Hollis, who has 2 prior civil judgments against him for fraudulent investment schemes in the state of Georgia. The second gentleman involved is his brother-in-law. The LLC lists no actual assets, no physical address beyond a mail drop in Buckhead, and no verifiable investment portfolio. Your attorney," I let that word sit between us for a moment, "apparently did not research who he was helping you hand $214,000 to." Leonard made a sound that was not quite a word. "You were not investing my pension," I said. "You were giving it to con artists, men who targeted recently retired men with access to liquid assets, men who knew exactly what they were doing, and they chose you because they knew you were exactly the kind of man who would think he had found an opportunity and take it and not ask enough questions." He was very still. "I am sorry that happened to you," I said, "and I meant it in the complicated way that you can mean something and still require justice for what it cost you. But the fact that you were deceived does not change the fact that you deceived me first. You took from me without my knowledge. You used a document I gave you in trust, and you did all of it while sitting at this table and eating breakfast with me for 13 months. I stood up. "The meeting with the attorneys is on Wednesday," I said. "You will need to be there. You will need to bring whatever financial documentation you have. And Leonard, I would strongly suggest that tonight you call the 2 men from Atlanta and you ask them where your money is, because when the fraud case opens against them, and it will, you will want to be the one who reported it, not the one who facilitated it." I picked up my keys and my glass. "The guest room is made up," I said. "I think it would be better if you slept there for now."
The weeks that followed were not dramatic in the way that stories sometimes make justice seem. There was no single courtroom moment, no grand speech, no door slamming. Justice, I have learned, is often slower and quieter than the injury. It does not announce itself, it accumulates. The Wednesday meeting at Patricia Rain's office was the first formal step. Leonard came, with his own attorney, a young man who I could tell immediately had not been briefed very thoroughly because he kept asking for documents that should have been basic preparation. Leonard sat across the conference table from me, and he looked like a man who had been awake for several nights, which I later learned from Marcus he had been. Patricia laid out the case simply and clearly. The civil complaint alleged that Leonard had used the power of attorney instrument beyond its intended scope and in a manner that constituted fraudulent conversion, the taking of another's property without consent and for one's own purpose. The documentation was substantial. The emails alone, Patricia said, were remarkable evidence of premeditation. Leonard's attorney asked if there was room for a private settlement. Patricia said she was open to hearing any proposal that included full restitution of the $214,000, plus legal costs and damages. Leonard's attorney said that would require time to arrange. Patricia said that was fine. The clock on the civil action was already running. What happened over the following 6 weeks was a cascade of consequences, each one following the last with a kind of grim inevitability.
The State Insurance Licensing Board opened a review of Leonard's license based on the financial misconduct complaint. His license was placed in provisional status, which meant he could not write new policies or be employed in any licensing capacity while the review was pending. Leonard had been considering returning to part-time consulting work. That possibility evaporated. The hidden savings account, the one he had been quietly building from our joint funds, was identified in the legal proceedings, and its balance was ordered frozen as potential restitution funds, $18,000 and change. It was not the $214,000, but it was something. It was the proof of a pattern. The two Atlanta men, Derek Hollis and his brother-in-law, became subjects of a separate fraud investigation when Patricia's firm filed a complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State's office regarding Meridian Capital Partners, LLC. I was not the only victim, as it turned out. There were at least 3 other people whose money had been funneled into that entity, all of the men who had recently retired with access to pension or annuity funds. The investigation moved slowly, as these things do, but it moved. Leonard cooperated with that investigation. He did what I had suggested he do that night in the kitchen. He called the attorneys. He provided documentation. He became a cooperating party rather than a silent one. That cooperation mattered, both to the fraud investigation and to his own legal exposure. His attorney eventually negotiated a position where Leonard's cooperation with the fraud case would be taken into account in the civil settlement discussions. But the civil case between us, between me and the man I had been married to for 31 years, proceeded on its own terms. The settlement agreement was reached 4 months after I had sat across from him in that kitchen with my empty coffee mug in my hands. The terms included the transfer of Leonard's full share of our home equity to me upon sale of the property. It included the liquidation of his remaining retirement accounts in an amount that came to approximately $162,000, transferred into a replacement retirement vehicle in my name. It included a structured payment plan for the remaining balance. And it included the dissolution of our marriage, which was something neither of us had said out loud until the attorneys put it on paper, but which had been true since that Thursday morning in November. When Leonard signed those papers, I was not in the room. Patricia had advised me that my presence was not required for the signing, and that it was often better for all parties if the principals were not face-to-face for that moment. I appreciated that wisdom. I was at Geneva's kitchen table, drinking coffee from her good china, when Patricia called to tell me the papers had been signed. "It is done," Patricia said. "Thank you," I said. "You did the hard part," she said. "I just organized the documentation." I hung up. Geneva looked at me across the table. "Well," she said. "Done," I said. She reached across and took my hand and held it. We sat there for a while without talking, which is one of the things I value most about a friendship of that many years, the ability to simply sit together inside a significant moment without needing to fill it with words. There was one conversation I had not yet had, and that was with my son Darian. Marcus had known from the beginning. Darian, who lives in another city and who has a more complicated relationship with his father, had been harder to reach and harder to tell. When I finally told him over a video call on a Sunday afternoon, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Mama, what do you need?" And I told him the same thing I had told Marcus. "I need you to be all right. I need you to know that I am all right. And I need you to understand that what happened does not change who your father is to you. That is a relationship you will navigate on your own terms in your own time." Darian cried a little. He apologized for crying. I told him not to apologize. "He should have protected you," Darian said. "He was supposed to protect you." "He was," I said. "And he didn't. And I protected myself. That is the ending I choose to focus on." Leonard moved out of our home in February. We sold the house in April. The fig tree in the backyard was blooming when the new owners took possession. I stood at the gate for a moment before I drove away, and I looked at it. That tree I had planted 40 years ago, that had fruited reliably every summer, that had asked nothing of anyone and given quietly and consistently year after year. I thought it was a fitting last image of that chapter of my life.
I live in a condominium now, on the 3rd floor of a building near the hospital where I worked for 31 years. I can see the chapel steeple from my bedroom window. It is smaller than the house on Camellia Street and quieter, and it is entirely mine. My pension, of course, cannot be fully restored. The original account is gone, and that loss is real. But between the settlement, the replacement retirement vehicle, and my own continuing work, because I am 63, not 70, and I am not ready to stop, my financial footing is stable. Not everything I had planned, but stable enough. Geneva and I have coffee every Sunday, alternating whose kitchen we use. Marcus visits once a month and helps me with things around the condo and eats everything in my refrigerator like he is still 20 years old. Darian and I talk on the phone every Tuesday evening. He is still working through his feelings about his father. I do not rush him.
Leonard, I am told, not by my sons who know better than to bring him to me unbidden, but through the particular channels that small communities always have, Leonard is living in an apartment near his sister. The provisional license review concluded with restrictions on his professional activities. The fraud investigation into Meridian Capital Partners is ongoing. He cooperates. He keeps his head down. He is not the man he thought he was going to be at this stage of his life, and I suspect he knows that and lives with it. I do not hate him. I want to be clear about that, because I think there is sometimes an expectation that a woman in my position should either forgive completely or hate with equal completeness. I do neither. What I feel for Leonard is something more like the sadness you feel for a person who had something real and chose to throw it away because they could not tolerate the ordinary discomforts of an honest life. That is a kind of poverty that no investment return could affix. Several people who knew us, who saw what happened from the edges, came to me afterward and said they were sorry. Some of them also said, with a kind of careful honesty that I appreciated, that they had suspected something was not right with Leonard for some time, that he had seemed distracted, secretive, different. One of our neighbors, Loretta, who lives across the street from the old house and has been a quiet constant in my life for 18 years, told me she had seen Leonard coming and going at unusual hours for most of the previous year, and had wondered but had not said anything because it was not her business. It was not your fault, I told her. It was not your responsibility. It was mine to handle, and I handled it. She hugged me very hard. I let her.
I have had time now, sitting in my third-floor condo with the chapel steeple visible from my window, to think about what this experience has taught me. Not just about Leonard, or about marriage, or about financial documents and power of attorney provisions, though it has taught me a great deal about all of those things, but about something deeper. I learned that trusting someone is not the same as surrendering your vigilance. I had believed for 31 years that choosing to trust my husband fully meant not checking his drawers, not reviewing account statements, not asking too many questions. I had believed that vigilance and trust were opposites, that to be watchful was to be suspicious, and to be suspicious was to be disloyal. I was wrong. Trust is not the absence of awareness. Trust is a choice you make in the presence of awareness, and choose anyway. And when the evidence that trust has been betrayed is sitting in front of you, the loving thing, the truly loving, truly self-respecting thing, is to see it clearly. I also learned that silence is not peace. For years, there were small things I had noticed and set aside because the peace of the household felt more important than the questions those things raised. I told myself I was being gracious, being the bigger person, not making mountains out of molehills. But the mountains were already there. I had simply chosen not to look at them. And I learned, this one matters most to me, that a woman is not diminished by protecting herself. I had worried in those first days what people would think, whether they would see me as cold for freezing the account, calculating for meeting with an attorney, hard-hearted for proceeding with legal action against my own husband. I was conditioned, as so many of us are, to believe that a woman who fights for herself must sacrifice being seen as kind. But kindness and self-protection are not enemies. Standing up for what is right is not cruelty, and protecting 31 years of your own labor from someone who took it without asking is not vengeance. It is justice. Simply, quietly, firmly, justice. If you are listening to this today, and something in this story has touched something in your own life, if you are sitting with a quiet worry that you have been setting aside, or a document you have not reviewed, or a conversation you have been putting off having, I want you to know this. It is not too late to look clearly. It is never too late to ask the question. You built what you built, year by year, brick by brick. It belongs to you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today and for listening to my story. If something I shared resonated with you, if you have a story of your own, or if this gave you something to think about,
I would love to hear from you in the comments. Your words matter to me more than you know. And please, if you know someone who might need to hear this today, a sister, a friend, someone going through something quiet and heavy, share this with them. Sometimes the most important thing we can do for someone we love is hand them a story that reminds them they are not alone. Remember, every story has a lesson, and yours might be just beginning. Take care of yourselves, my dears, all of you. I am Everly, and this has been my story.